Hello, good afternoon, everyone. So before I proceed, I'd just like to thank SOAS, Ms. Christina, for inviting me to speak here. I am Camille Calanno, museum researcher and conservator of the Ethnology Division of the National Museum of the Philippines. So this afternoon, I will be presenting our recent study on the Banton cloth, currently considered the oldest Ikat textile in the Philippines, understanding its provenance based on technique, material, and design. Also, I'd like to say that I'm not an Ikat expert or an expert in anything, really. So please be kind to me as well. So for my presentation, I will first give a brief overview of the cloth's history and function, and then the methods used for this research, followed by the results and discussion on the possible hypotheses on the origin of the cloth, and some recommendations for further study. So in the 1960s, the Anthropology Division of the National Museum of the Philippines, which is now separated into ethnology and archaeology, conducted archaeological investigations of the reported burial site in Banton Island in central Philippines. The site was badly disturbed, but the team was able to recover wooden coffins, modified crania, gold ornaments, fragments of 14th to 15th century Chinese and Siamese jars, and a fragment of ikat cloth. The textile fragment, now more popularly known as the Banton burial cloth, measures 81 centimeters long and 21 centimeters wide, and believed to have been used as a funerary shroud, as it was found associated with skeletal remains. This practice is similar to the Philippine Cordilleras, where bodies or skeletons for secondary burial are wrapped with textiles. Mortuary textiles can also be used as coffin lining or offering to the spirits. Relative dating puts the cloth from late 13th to early 14th century, making it the oldest known textile that exists in the Philippines. After its recovery in the 1960s, there is no in-depth study conducted on the fragment to determine its provenance. The Banton burial cloth was declared a national cultural treasure in 2010 and is exhibited at the Hibla ng Laing Filipino, the Artistry of Philippine Textiles Gallery in the National Museum of Anthropology in Manila. So this paper aims to lay down possible hypotheses on the provenance of the Banton burial cloth coming from a cultural materials conservation perspective by employing non-invasive, non-destructive visual examinations on the cloth and comparative analysis. So for this preliminary study, these hypotheses hope to eventually lead to answers that can address some of the often asked questions, like what was it locally woven? Was it acquired through trade? Who is the owner? Is it really the oldest textile in the Philippines? In 2021, a team of researchers revisited the cloth to discuss its provenance, as visits of the Ethnology and Archaeology divisions in the previous years revealed that abaca or Musa textilis do not grow in the island of Banton. Field and inventory reports were reviewed as well as the other published and unpublished works on the site and its associated materials. In the same year, we coordinated with the Textile Testing Laboratory in Manila on the identification of the fibers and dyes used, type of weave employed, and microscopic cross-sectional view of the fibers. But due to the required sample size, which is at least 45 centimeters by 21 centimeters or an A4 size paper, the said tests were omitted. Instead, the fragment was photo-documented and re-examined through optical microscopy, and findings were compared to related literature and other Philippine textiles. Interviews conducted by researchers from the Ethnology Division of the National Museum during their field research in 2018 and 2024 confirmed that abaca weaving was once a practice in the island of Banton. Weavers aged 70 and above recall their grandmothers weaving using abaca. However, there was no mention of the use of dyes for the warp or weft, and when asked, they remember the fabrics to be of plain or neutral color. According to one of the weavers, the source of abaca was from the nearby islands of Marinduque, Mindoro, and Bicol, and was brought to Banton to be woven. Based on the interviews, the practice of abaca weaving dwindled when the weaver shifted to using buri, a type of palm which is more abundant in the island. Common products made of buri are raffia panels and bags, which are still being produced up to this day. So through visual examination, it was identified that both the warp and the weft threads of the fragment are made of abaca fibers. The warp threads are natural or undyed and dyed red and black, while the weft threads are all natural or undyed, with discoloration in some parts. The warp threads were tie-dyed in red and black prior to the weaving. The weaving technique is plain weave or 1/1. Ikat or tie-dyed designs are visible on the red and black warp threads. Rating the condition of the cloth from 1 to 5, with 1 as very poor and 5 as very good condition, it is rated as 2 for its fragile state. A loose fiber from the fragment was also observed under a steer microscope to compare it with the raw and newer abaca fiber collected from Mindanao. Based on visual observations, it can be seen that both fibers have the same shine and translucence, and some areas have fine and brighter lines. The observed designs on the black bands of the fragment are S and inverted S and double X, or maybe diamond, and series of triangles on the undyed band in between the red bands near the long edge of the fragment, and an undecipherable symbol that has curved lines. The designs were applied through resist dyeing before the weaving of the cloth. We noticed that these patterns and symbols on the cloth are similar to those textiles in the Cordillera region north of the Philippines. The S, inverted S, and double X are similar to the symbols on the textiles in Ifugao, as you can see in this slide. The bands and horizontal lines are also similar to those textiles in Benguet, Mountain Province, and Kalinga. However, Cordilleran textiles are mostly made of cotton fibers and not abaca. These similarities in patterns and symbols made us think that it could be possible that the weaver or the owner of the cloth must have come from Cordillera, integrating northern symbols to abaca weaving. We also compared it to cotton, indigo-dyed funerary cloths from Ifugao and Mountain Province to see the difference in the fibers. The fragment was also compared to selected textiles from the Bagobo, Blaan, Mandaya, and Tiboli groups of Mindanao. The 4 textiles were chosen because of the fibers and natural dyes used, the weaving and dyeing techniques employed, the resemblance in the designs, and they were made and gathered from the field in the early part of the 20th century. Microscopic images were taken from the 4 textiles at random spots for the natural and dyed red and black threads. From the captured images, the Bagobo, Blaan, Mandaya, and Tiboli used dyed black abaca threads as weft. Of the 4 textiles from Mindanao, the size of the warp and weft threads used by the Bagobo are more uniform, and the weaving is more consistent and compact compared to the Blaan, Mandaya, and Tiboli. The Banton burial cloth is different from the 4 other textiles because of the use of natural and undyed weft threads. And based on recent documentation of the National Museum Ethnology Division researchers among the Blaan of Polomolok and Tiboli of South Cotabato, the weavers used dyed black weft threads in their abaca textiles. So based on previous studies, field research, and observation from the visual examinations, here are some of the potential hypotheses we have listed so far. There could possibly a very old practice of ikat weaving in Banton, especially if there are still living culture bearers who can testify the existence of abaca weaving in the island. While they do not recall the use of dyes, it is possible that knowledge of ikat weaving was not transferred or continually practiced. Second, as mentioned earlier, the abaca in Banton Island was sourced from nearby islands where there is tangible evidence of maritime trade, like in Marinduque. The island could also have a potential role in the local and international maritime trade. With this, one can speculate that the Banton burial cloth could possibly be a product of pre-colonial trade. And third, similar to the funerary practices of the groups in Cordillera, the Banton burial cloth could be a prized possession of a buried person in the coffin where it was found. The owner or the person could also have an affluent status in the society, being interred in caves that face the sea because of the belief that souls of the deceased become ancestors in the afterlife. So in conclusion, putting together findings from the field and preliminary observations through visual examinations have helped us in drawing out possible theories on the origin of the Banton burial cloth. More scientific techniques can be employed to gather more information, not only on the cloth's origin and manufacture, but also on the history, trade, and other intangible cultural heritage that existed in the island of Banton and other nearby islands. Some recommendations for further research. A further study that would entail looking for samples of abaca woven cloths from Mindanao, Bicol, or Panay, the islands surrounding the province of Romblon, in order to compare the warp and the weft of the Banton burial cloth. And perhaps you can get even further information and search for abaca woven cloth from Indonesia or other Southeast Asian countries to determine if it is locally woven or obtained through trade. Conducting archival research on ikat weaving and abaca weaving in Banton to confirm if this were practiced or not during the pre-colonial or colonial period, and if abaca woven textiles were trade goods. Other scientific techniques and analysis can also be employed to determine its age. Here are some options. One, carbon dating, although it is destructive and expensive. Second, accelerator mass spectrometry, an alternative for C14, also destructive but only requires a few milligrams of sample. And other applicable and advanced isotope analysis that can be non-destructive to keep the integrity of the object. To identify the materials used, such as the fiber and dyes, some options are the Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy, which can possibly lead to the locality where the dyes were collected, scanning electron microscopy to verify the abaca plant used, and other applicable and advanced DNA analysis, which will only require a very small sample from the object. And lastly, collaborating with researchers from other disciplines such as history, maritime, anthropology, archaeology, museology, conservation science will certainly help in determining the provenance of the Banton burial cloth, and also in developing other potential research. So here is a list of the references we used, and I'd like to also acknowledge my co-researchers on the Banton burial cloth research, Marites Pastauro, curator of the Ethnology Division, and Ivan Cultura, museum researcher of the Archaeology Division. I'd like to also thank the Banton Field Research Team from the Ethnology Division for sharing their field data, and the management of the National Museum for their continued support and for allowing me to speak here and attend this symposium. So for questions and for those who are interested to collaborate, please reach me in this email address. And apart from the Banton cloth research, I'm also currently doing research on the Benguet mummies and on the managing museum collection environments, if any of you are working on those similar topics and want to collaborate. Thanks so much.
Because the topic is a bit different from the next two, we thought maybe we could field our questions for Camille now, if you have specific, just so we don't, yeah, go ahead.
Can you go back to the references?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Put your first slide. Can we see the textile?
Oh, yeah.
Please.
Right. This one? Yeah.
Wait, sorry.
I have a three-part question.
Okay.
Given that you haven't used any of these very expensive technical means for dating, on what basis did you date it? Secondly, if it's anything like the date you suggest, how on earth has it survived?
I know.
And number three, why do you appear to assume that it was made locally?
Yeah. So for the first question, it was relatively dated with the cultural materials that's in the same cave. So it was Chinese and Siamese jars dated 14th to 15th century. So that's why archaeologists say that it's could be of the same age. So they call it relative dating. I'm not an expert in archaeology, so I just, yeah. And then for the second question, sorry.
How did it survive?
I have the same question. So that's the reason, one of the reasons why we discussed it in the museum, because I asked the question, how did you say that it's the oldest ikat in the Philippines? So, and that's the reason. That's also the reason why they tagged me along in this research. So, how did it survive? Because in conservation, environment is a really important factor. So if it's inside a coffin that's really sealed, it is possible. I mean, that's the reason why the mummies are still here, because it's there's a very nice climate inside. It's not disturbed in terms of environment, so it is actually possible. But it's still mind blowing that it's still here. So, actually, there's another fragment, but it's another discussion. But this one in particular, it's hard for me to get a sample. Also, number one, it's a national cultural treasure, so it's really not. You have to ask for permission to get samples. But when I was putting a backing support on it, so I was sewing. There's one tiny fiber that fell out, and as a practice, we have to collect it to save it because for research. And then I'm really thankful. It's not good, but that one fiber came out. That's why I was able to see it under a microscope. So, yes, that's for the second question. And the last one is.
You appear to have assumed it was made locally.
Yep. So we have made a lot of assumptions about this cloth. So that's the reason why and the research is on its early stages anyway. So we're just trying to ask a lot of questions and then later on answer them. So for now, I can't really answer that question. So, but we hope that we can continue our research in this particular cloth, given that we have a lot of other things that we do in the museum. But I hope I could focus on this one. So, yeah, thanks for the questions. Yes.
I'm sorry, you're behind the pillar and I'm here.
Hello po.
I'm just so happy that the National Museum has finally started to work and publish on this, right? I was fortunate enough to be able to study the Banton before it was declared the national treasure in 2006. And I did present along with Judith Cameron at Indo-Pacific conference in 2009. Yeah, about this. So I'm just so happy that National Museum is working on it. Couple of questions. Do we know which cave? Because it wasn't clear in Chamson's notes. Which cave? Right? So it's associated, but I'm curious if you were able to determine. And that the two pieces, right? I heard there's a third piece. I never saw the third piece. But the second piece is very different, right, from this one. Do you know if it was together? So I guess those are just my questions because I could not find that out. Yeah, I'll move so that you don't have to go behind the pillar.
So for the first question, according to the reports by Evangelista in the 1960s, it was found in Guyangan 1 cave. So there are two caves, Guyangan 1 and 2. So it's the first cave po. And then for the second question, that's another thing na pinag-usapan din po namin. We were talking about it kasi obviously it's not of the same. It doesn't look the same. So we're thinking it could be just another textile that was exhibited years ago. Because they're both funerary textiles and then maybe displayed, it's another theory. And I'm trying to look at exhibition catalogs from the early 90s in the museum, but I was unfortunate to find just even a list of what was exhibited before in the previous exhibitions, just to know why the two fragments are said to be Banton. But for the declaration, I believe that it's just this fragment, and because this one has a accession number and the other one doesn't have an accession number, so that's why.
But it was in the same coffin?
That I'm not sure.
I was able to interview Orly Avignon, who was the conservator at the time, and he says they were both Banton.
Okay.
But then he told me there's a third.
I didn't see the third one.
But yeah, so I'm very curious about the third piece that he said went to ethnology because the two pieces are in archaeology. The third piece is in ethnology, and at that time I couldn't do well anyway. So that's a whole other story. But according to Orly Avignon, and I believe he's still alive. I hope he's still alive.
I think.
Yes. So
Sorry.
he was conservator at the time.
Yeah.
He said that at least for sure this and that's the other piece without the accession number and whatever that third was are all from, except I don't know if they, Banton.
Banton.
The
Same cave, yeah.
but all relatively dated to the ceramics.
But from the archaeological reports, it says a fragment. So Yeah, so that's why we're discussing. Maybe it was just the second one could be just associated with this because, but it's a different, very different. Also, the second one is very much more fragile compared to this one. So, and they have different colors. I'll be discussing those two fragments in the World Ikat next month because that's.
You don't have a picture?
I,
Anyway,
I could show if someone is interested and just check it on my phone. So.
Marianne had a question.
I just wanted to know if there have been any studies on the skeletal remains.
Yes.
Oh,
Jack Medrano.
Yeah.
Jack Medrano did his master's thesis on this.
Yeah, thank you.
mm.
Findings?
He wasn't interested in the textile.
Typical. Sorry. Did you publish
No, it's not one. I'm waiting. I'm hoping. Well, that's another discussion. I'm waiting for something.
And then, Marianne, can you mention her mines? There was this in the Tabon cave.
Chauffeurs.
Yes. If you could just mention kind of
All right.
how, just to kind of give a bit of.
Yeah, very recently, within the last 6 months, there had been a formal presentation to the Philippine press of results of a long-term study by Hermine Chauffeur, who's a Belgian archaeologist, and Timothy Vitales, who's an archaeologist from the National Museum, and several others, presenting the results of electron microscope, the new fangled electron microscopes, the state-of-the-art electron microscopes, some of the tool flakes from Tabon caves. As I think you would know that the Tabon cave human remains date to the oldest, thus far the oldest humans in Southeast Asia. The date is 47,000 years for the human remains. So that's kind of a very deep, presence of Homo sapiens. But at 33,000, the stone flake tools showed abrasion marks, which they have conclusively, written up as the working with fibrous materials, and conclusively put it down to bamboo working, which then allows us to think that basketry at least was already possible or was done at 33,000 years in Tabon, in Palawan, and potentially houses of bamboo. So that's all very exciting. 33,000 years is a lot. It's a very big number.
And Banton is what range?
Oh, that's much younger.
Younger.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is Australasian. Yeah, that's early Homo sapiens.
There's also another master's thesis by my our curator, Marites Tauro, about here, yung cranial vault modification practice among the early inhabitants of Banton Island, but I'm not really sure about the results, pero I'll tell her po. But I think I have this Paz Marites.
Oh, Paz Marites.
You mentioned that the skeleton had been examined. Was that scientifically dated?
It was coeval with, they didn't do, it's very expensive, they don't do any absolute dating, but Jack's dates were kind of coeval with the ceramic dating, so that's.
But I'm going to be cynical, but the ceramic exists today.
Oh,
So
no,
if
I
I
know.
found it in a tube today, I can't
Nobody's
say
happy with
it
the
must be
relative
dated.
dating.
Yeah.
Nobody's happy
Yep.
with the
Just
relative
because
dating.
it coexisted with older material
Everybody
doesn't.
turns there's no, there
I
are no.
think that would be very dangerous
Yes.
precedent.
It's difficult. Yeah, I don't think anybody's trying to
Okay.
over kind of claim, right? Yeah, nobody's happy with the relative date.
Yes.
That's what we have at the moment.
Yeah,
So how
that's
did it become a national treasure? Is it based on not so much?
But that's a different story.
I agree.
to the textile. Thank you very much, first of all, for the presentation. Very interesting. And I'm just interested about the going back to the material components. I was just thinking if it's because you briefly talked about sampling, which I imagine would be very difficult for this little piece of textile.
Yeah.
And I'm particularly interested in the dyes. Do you think it will be possible to take a sample for dye analysis in the future?
I hope there would be like a instrument for that. With the rate of the technology now, it's so fast. Like,
Yeah, but
what
do you think sampling would be possible?
sampling.
Taking a little, maybe 2 centimeters.
Oh,
of-
dear.
We have two colors for this cloth, so 2 centimeters of each color. It's gonna take a lot of permissions to get samples for sure, but if we're really interested in doing this research, we have to.
Please get in touch.
Yeah, and I'm actually thinking about you conservation scientists who can help us in doing this.
chat about
Yes. Yes, definitely. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.